Hello, my name is Ian Kinder, and I'm the owner and the founder of Live Safe Academy. Welcome to episode number 7 of Real Encounters. This is going to be a great video clip because it's going to give us an opportunity to talk about a lot of important issues. But let me start by saying that anytime that we have these episodes, it's never our goal to second guess people who are in that situation. We're only using these video clips as a visual reference to talk about concepts, so that if, God forbid, you're in the same type of a situation, you'll understand some of the important concepts to help keep you safe. Again, never second guessing the person who was in that situation. Now, I'm very honored today to have Joseph Little Joe Ferreira, who's recently retired as a sergeant out of a local police department here in the Detroit metro area, but is recently hired into the sheriff's department of a county here in the southeastern Michigan area. So, Joe, thank you very much for being a part of this show. It's always an honor to have you here. And not everybody who watches these episodes have seen everything that we've done in the past. So if you don't mind, you have a very unique set of credentials to talk about these important issues, and maybe kind of let people know a little bit about your background before we jump into the video clip itself.
Sure, Ian, thanks. And I'm glad to be back with you and all the YouTubers that are following, all our viewers. I have 38 years on the job as of 2015. I came on the job in 1977 with the Federal Reserve Bank Police Department. After a couple years there, I went to the Oakland County Sheriff's Department as a deputy for 6 years. And then after that, the city of Southfield, Michigan kind of kidnapped me away from the Sheriff's Department. And I worked for Southfield for almost 30 years, working various assignments, including patrol, a specialized unit called Directed Patrol. I was a detective for a while. I did narcotics. My small stature, 5'2", 140 pounds, made me good for undercover work, vice, narcotics. I worked a lot of surveillance. I was the department training officer and range master for a year or so. Oversaw use of force training for about 25 years. I oversaw use of force, and that means everything from verbal skills to firearms. I've been teaching at a local police academy for 27 years now. And again, my area of expertise is use of force. With that said, I have about 5,000 hours of instructor schools. I've been to almost every major firearms manufacturer, handgun manufacturers' schools, and used to teach for a major handgun manufacturer for a while as a subcontractor, of course, part-time. So with that said, I've been on the Law Enforcement Television Network. I'm featured on police1.com. I've done a series on defensive tactics for small officers for about 20 years now.
Well, very honored to have someone with your credentials here on the show. And, as I've said ad nauseum many times, you're one of the few people I call teacher. And I always say that because I want to show you and Lou that respect that I'm honored to learn from you so much. And, the other thing is you're a highly recommended now a professional witness and dealing with the same type of issues that we're going to be dealing with on this video. So it's a real blessing that you're going to come out here and share your experience with the viewers. And I'm very grateful for you taking the time to do that and sharing your expertise to do that. So all of that said, let's go ahead and jump into the video clip. I know I've got some thoughts, but I really want to hear your thoughts.
Okay. Well, we start with an incident where you've got a couple of people sitting at a counter at a Waffle House minding their own business, and there's some type of verbal altercation. You can see that they both look to their right towards the camera. And something is said by somebody, we don't need to go there, let's discuss only tactics today. They mind their own business, but eventually they're approached by two males wearing black t-shirts and shorts, as I recall. And the closer to us individual wearing kind of a striped shirt seated at the counter gets up. Eventually they talk and he shakes hands with one of the individuals. And the other subject seated at the counter, a male wearing a white t-shirt, he leaves. It appears he goes maybe to the restroom or somewhere like that. Upon returning, the white male that was shaking hands with the male in the striped shirt, again, you got two subjects, black t-shirts and shorts on. Then a third male joins them. He's got kind of a plaid-ish pair of shorts on and a kind of a grayish t-shirt, and a beard and sunglasses on his head. So at one point, you got three subjects there that appear to be together. The handshaker goes up and attempts to shake the hand of the black male in the white T-shirt, and he refuses to do so. He takes a very non-aggressive stance, puts both his hands together at his waistline on the outside of his clothing. He shakes his head no. You can, when the guy brings his hand up, you can tell he wants to shake hands, but the black male opts not to, in a very polite manner, I might say. You see his shoulders shrug like, no, I don't want to do this. So obviously something was said that was bad. The white male in the black T-shirt, one of the two, if your viewers pay attention to the video, they will see that he is definitely left-handed. He takes a left-bladed stance. His right foot is slightly forward. His left hip is slightly to the rear, and he is slightly bladed, which should tell anybody with any street sense at all that this individual is probably a high probability of being left-handed, which is rare, but in this case, our soon-to-be victim, at that point realizes something's going on. He's got some street smarts, God bless him. And this guy just throws a left sucker punch right at his face, which he kind of dodges out of the way. White shirt, the victim, who just got a punch thrown at him, either drops something and has to recover it from the floor, or he just bends really deep and then comes back up. It's hard to tell because he's blocked by his assailant. When he comes back up, again, no retaliation. He doesn't try and throw a counter punch. He creates a little bit of distance, and he retreats a little bit back towards the area that he came from when he left maybe the men's room, whatever, that hallway there at the Waffle House, and just avoids contact with the individual. Again, no retaliation. You don't see his fingers coming up. He's not threatening anybody. He's just like, hey, hey, dude, leave me alone, whatever he's saying. And we have to remember now he's got at least two adversaries. He's got two guys, both in black T-shirts, white males with short hair. They both have shorts on there. So they're dressed kind of alike. We don't know the background. We don't know that neighborhood. We don't come from there. So we don't know if these guys are in a gang. We don't know, are they skinheads? We don't know any of that. Excuse me, dry throat. So he retreats back a little bit. He's got two guys to watch in the doorway. You notice that the second black T-shirt is holding that door open. And the guy in the gray T-shirt and sunglasses and beard and shorts, he has left. Now, a few moments later, as they watch the video, another subject, whether it's the guy that was in the gray T-shirt or not, another guy with no shirt on, comes in really low and fast, and he weasels through that open door and past the guy in the black T-shirt. He charges very low. When you look at him, he's either trying to tackle this guy, he's a wrestler, or my big concern, if that were me, is that he was coming in low to stab me in the stomach. But he weasels in quick and low, and he comes at our victim quickly. Our victim retreats. Now our victim, think about the big picture here, our victim has three subjects to worry about. One standing at the open door holding it open, the other one who threw the punch at him who's a few feet away, and now this guy who snakes in really quick and around and runs right at him. Our victim retreats, obviously draws his gun, and apparently one-handed fires, I believe it was 3 rounds, which did in fact strike the subject. You see no ricochets in the movie, in the video. You don't see anybody jumping out of the way. I would imagine all 3 rounds make their mark. That subject then runs back out, and you have both black T-shirt, white males in black similarly. That would be a concern to me, especially if I was visiting that area and didn't know who hangs around there. At this point, they don't even run out. They just kind of saunter out, get into a vehicle. It turns out to be an SUV in the parking lot, and they leave. And en route to the hospital, I believe they have a bad accident. And the subject that attacked the man, it turns out, has been shot multiple times. I believe it was 3 times. And he's dead in the vehicle. He's dead at the scene from multiple gunshot wounds, not from the shoot or the accident itself, but rather from the gunshot wounds. So all in all, there's so much to discuss. I'm going to turn it back to you now, Ian. Give me some of your thoughts. But that's a brief overview so the people know they're watching the right video. That's what we were talking about.
Thanks, Joe, and again, great way to break that down and point out some key points that people can draw their attention to. Excuse me. Also, we both live in the same state, so sometimes we get some of the same throat issues. I apologize. I think the guy did a great job from a self-defense perspective. I've got no critiques of him in that regard. It looks like he might have dropped his gun there, and I don't know if he did or not. But I would say that an important part of carrying properly so that your gun is secure, or whatever weapon you're carrying is secure, so it doesn't fall. And I know that sounds funny, but people who do carry guns, particularly when they just stick them in a belt, you know, they just stick them in their waist and they don't have a holster, those guns do fall out. They fall out just when folks are walking around, much less if they get in any type of a dynamic situation. So I don't know if he dropped the gun or not. But it's a good point to bring out that if you're going to carry a weapon, however you carry that weapon, it has to be secure so it doesn't come out by accident. The other thing I'd like to comment on here is that you notice he came into that he recessed into that area where he limited the number of people that could come at him at one time. I thought that was really smart. I don't know if he did that consciously or on instincts, but if you look at the layout of the building, as he backed into that little corridor towards what looks like maybe it was a bathroom area, he's now limiting a situation where all three people can't converge on him at one time, because they're all going to be in front of him and they're all going to have to come at him in a way that they can't surround him. So I don't know if I'm explaining that clearly, but you can see that in the video. I thought that was smart tactics because he's reducing the number of problems that he has to solve at one time. So I thought that was smart. But I do have a couple more comments I want to make about the fighting aspect of this, but I want to throw that back at you, Joe. Do you have anything you want to add in so far based on what I said, or what your thoughts are about the video?
No, as you said, he puts himself, you know, you could argue that while he's putting himself into a funnel, he's backing himself into a corridor. Well, we have to remember, again, whether this was conscious, subconscious, or he had no idea that he did it at all, he just came from back in that corridor area. So he would be more familiar if there was somebody in the men's room, if there was somebody in the ladies' room, and maybe he knew, based on the fact that he had come out of there, that there was nobody back there and that was a good place to go, i.e. nobody could come out behind him or just get into the mix not knowing what was going on. So I agree with you that moving to that, you know, you got a lot of glass in that Waffle House, you got that entryway, that vestibule area that's all glass. I think he put himself in a good tactical position also.
Yeah, I agree. And, you know, anytime you look at an environment, we talk about the concept of strategic positioning, where we want to put ourselves in the best position. So number one, we're less likely to get caught off guard. Number two, we have more time to respond. And number three, if a fight breaks out, we're going to have maximum advantage. Well, with any layout you can look at, you can say that there's going to be advantages and disadvantages. But I think in that moment, because somebody already threw a punch at him and no one had presented a weapon, I think he was thinking, again, whether it's subconscious or conscious, he was thinking in terms of a physical attack. And from the perspective of a physical attack, I think the way he positioned himself, he was reducing the probability that he'd get overwhelmed by multiple attackers at the same time. Now, obviously, if it was a shooting, standing behind that glass, being trapped in that funnel, that would have its own challenges. But I think he was operating on that context of, I've already been attacked physically, I don't see any weapons. A physical attack is a context in which I'm going to kind of interpret this situation. Plus, the other thing is, you know, you're just in with where you are. You know, I mean, he doesn't have that many places to go, and any place he goes, his movement is limited to a point. And like you said, he was familiar with where he already came from. And again, whether it be conscious or subconscious, it's natural for people to want to go where they have the greatest amount of knowledge, because that's where they have the greatest amount of confidence.
I agree. And as you know, when I teach, there's two. We both do in our own ways, using our own terms, but we talk about situation, what's going on around you, but we also talk about spatial awareness. And I believe if he did, you know, we don't have him here to interview. I'd maybe love to do that sometime. If we get a hold of him, the three of us could get together on YouTube and talk it out. But if he was aware of what he was doing, then he was aware of, one, the situation. He knew he couldn't trust these guys, and he was right. You know, they shook the first guy's hand and everything was fine. Just because somebody doesn't shake your hand, that's no reason to throw a sucker punch at them. So these guys could not be trusted. So I believe he was situationally aware, and I believe he was spatially aware. he knew where to position himself in that building to give him the best tactical advantage. So
yeah, that's great.
I concur with you.
Now, as far as the techniques of what he did, I just want to point out a couple different things, and I'd love to get your insight for the viewers. Number one, we notice here that he shot with a one-handed grip on the gun. Now, Lou, or Joe, excuse me, I don't know if you're familiar with shooting with one-handed or not, and I say that sarcastically because you've been teaching that for a very long time. Most shooting is practiced either one, I should say it like this, let me kind of back up a little bit. Most people that practice how to shoot, most training in the gun training industry is done either exclusively or almost exclusively from a two-handed grip. But yet, if you look at shootings, most shootings happen with a one-handed grip. So you get an immediate disconnect there, which always kind of surprises me, because the whole point of the gun industry is gun training industry is to prepare people for the reality of actual violence. That's what we're training for. And yet you see this obvious disconnect. And that by itself, we can spend a lot of time talking about. But the other thing is, I think it's very safe to say, as is the case in most altercations, that he was hyper-focused on the threat because his brain was desperately seeking information to get the information he needed to make the choices that he needed to be safe. And the primary source in most violent altercations, the source of information is going to be the eyes. So the brain has got the eyes hyper-focused on the problem that the brain is trying to solve. It's not looking at the gun sights. So when he's aiming his gun, he's having to aim his gun while being hyper-focused on the threat, not referencing his gun sights. And it appears there he shot 3 times and he hit 3 times. So accuracy was not an issue. So that's another thing we talk a lot about. This issue of sighted fire versus target-focused shooting. Both are necessary methods, but just like we don't try to saw wood with a hammer or saw wood with, we don't try to use a hammer, a saw to for a nail, and we don't try to use a hammer to saw wood. They're both valuable tools, but we have to use them for the job that they're designed. In most conflicts, which are up close and personal, where the brain is going to reflexively hyper-focus the eyes on the problem that's trying to be solved, people aren't going to reference their sights, optics, or a red dot laser. They're going to be looking directly at the problem. So I think those are 2 valid issues. And then I've got a third issue, but I'll wait to bring that up, Joe, until you have a chance to comment.
I agree with you. The reality is he had a lot going on. He had, and again, whether it registered in his brain or not, he had 2 guys dressed similarly that looked similar. Are they gang members? Who are they? And at least one of them's confrontational. Well, that's an understatement. One of them tried to sucker punch him. And then in the midst of all that, now this third party runs in, and again, as your viewers watch the video, he comes in like a freaking snake, man. He weasels around. He's coming in really low. That's something either a wrestler's going to want to do, but he kind of lunges at his stomach. And again, my big concern is very few people come in low like that and punch in the stomach. My concern is that he's got a knife and he's trying to stab this guy. And the reality is, for our victim, he might not have enough time to register that. My point that I want to back up with you is he had a lot going on. He had a lot to look at, which would also reduce his ability to look for his sights because of the fact that the guy who's rushing him, the guy who just threw a punch at his head, and he's got the third guy who's dressed like the guy that threw a punch at his head, holding the door open. So he's got at least 3 targets, if you will, areas of concern, 3 different people, one of which is moving rapidly, introducing himself into the situation violently, very quickly, and coming right at him. So there's a lot going on there to be thinking. And I know that people say, well, it's muscle memory. I hate that term, but whatever. That's the current modern slang for, familiar task repetition. There's a lot going on to think about sight alignment, trigger control, grip, and stance. It's not like you're standing on a one-dimensional range punching holes in a piece of paper. Or like you said, setting up a El Presidente drill where you spin around and engage things. Real life is much more dynamic than that. And the reality is when you do live fire firearms training, it's important to do, don't get me wrong, but it's in a very static environment, a very safe environment. As we move on to force training, that's even better. It's more realistic, but without proper coaching and guidance, that can become almost a paintball game. We have to be careful of that. So what good instructors do is they induce a lot of stress into their training, real stress, not imagined stress. And this young man, wherever he trained, however he prepared, he did an excellent job because he did very well in this encounter. Again, he maintains a very peaceful position. I don't like his hands down around his waist. I would have preferred his hands up more like mine are right now, up, palms forward, and hey, I don't want any trouble, and I don't want to shake your hand. You know, a better job of protecting your upper body, especially your head, because of course that's where his assailant goes. You know, left hand sucker punch right to his face. He dodges that. He reads it well. He gets out of the way of it. And then again, I hope he dropped his cell phone, but like you, I'm concerned that he dropped his gun and then had to recover it. And as you know, I've got a pet peeve with that. I teach a handgun retention class for civilians as well as law enforcement, and I'm a firm believer in a quality retention holster so that stuff like that doesn't happen. So back to you.
Well, and what you see in the way that he shoots the gun is so classic in the way that we shoot the gun, teach people to shoot the gun, and we didn't invent any of this stuff. This stuff's been around for generations. But with the eyes fixated on the target and the gun locked out at full extension. And in my observation, when people can do that, that's exactly what they do. Because having the gun locked out at full extension where the gun, it comes closest to the eye line, gives people the greatest amount of confidence and competence to shoot the gun. So if they can lock that gun out, that's what they do. That's exactly what he did. He had one hand on the gun, which is the way most people shoot. I believe because it's quicker and faster and under stress, the brain wants quick and fast. How many things do we pick up where we have to coordinate a two-handed grip? Not that many things, but we pick up things with one hand all the time. So it's faster and it's easier. But so this is the way that people tend to fight. And we see whether he had training or not, this is exactly what he did. And we know that even when people have a lot of training to the contrary, this is still what they do under stress. And so we want to make sure our training as individuals is building on our biological responses and guiding our biological responses. We never want to fight against our biology because, to be blunt, you're just not going to win. Your biology is going to win over training because you're never going to train enough to beat your biology. But why would you want to? The biological programming that you have is based on generations of success, winning fights, surviving violent encounters. We want to take those instincts, and we want to use training to hone them and direct them to make them more effective. So without going into a lot of talking about that, I just think that he represents a classic example here of how shootings happen with or without training. One-handed grip, gun locked at full extension, eyes hyper-focus on the problem that's trying to be solved, not referencing the gun sights. And in that regard, I think anybody who's not incorporating that into their training really needs to start to think about, yeah, I need to have two-handed shooting because there's a time when that's the best option. But I also need to have one-handed shooting because there's a time when that's going to be the best option. And we always have to prioritize our training based on probabilities. And statistics clearly show whether you train with two hands or not, people tend to fall back on this one-handed grip. And again, we need to know how to use our sights, but we also need to know how to engage the threat effectively when our eyes are fixated on the problem that we're trying to solve. And that will be the majority of encounters. So not only do we have to have that in our practice, that needs to be the majority of our practice. And of course, that goes right back to a lot of the methods that we teach that came right out of World War I, all the way through Fairbairn and the municipal police, all the way through Fairbairn and Applegate during World War II, all the way through Lou Kyoto and the California Highway Patrol, and Joe, all the experience you have training your department in law enforcement, and many other examples that we can point to where we see that people who are trained on those methods perform the best because they're most consistent with the natural responses that they have under stress. What are your thoughts about that?
I agree totally. If you study human factors at all, which you know I have done, I've been privileged to work with a group called the Human Factors Research Group for 25 years. when you talk about the biology, when you talk about the sympathetic nervous system activating, once the SNS kicks in, once your startle response is activated, it is virtually uncontrollable if that happens. Now, you can train to reduce stress. That's what good force-on-force training does. It helps to keep you out of sympathetic nervous system activation. But once it happens, it is irreversible, and the body and the brain are going to do what's most efficient under the circumstances. And that's why we see, I can show you multiple videos of law enforcement officers who were trained exclusively on a two-hand combat grip in a spontaneous shooting, sudden and unexpected shooting, going to a one-hand threat-focused shooting stance and technique, even though they were never trained on it, which contradicts the belief that you will fight as you train. That's not necessarily true depending on the totality of the circumstances. So with that said, human factors does kick in here. Remember that his initial threat, everybody, is a sucker punch to the head. All right. He goes down, he comes back up. I hope, like I say, that he dropped his cell phone, but I fear that he also dropped his gun. So those two guys back off maybe a little bit because they realize, oh man, he's got a gun. Well, in comes your third ambush predator. He attacks, he's repelled. Again, for the viewers, for your followers, we have to realize that handguns are a miserable man stopper, and this is great proof of that. Although it does repel the attack, he runs out with as much energy as he ran in with and doesn't bleed out until later. If he did have a knife on him, if he did have a gun on him, he could have continued his attack against our victim. For whatever reason, he does not. Again, I can't see, the video's not clear enough to tell me if he does have a knife, but whatever his method of attack is, be it hand-to-hand, a sharp object, or it's obviously not a gun, he never fires a shot. Those 3 rounds, although they make contact, do not stop him. They do repel the attack, but it does not incapacitate him. And he runs out that door as fast as he ran in. And again, that time period, he could have used that to continue attacking our victim. Thank God that he didn't. And they can't get him to the hospital fast enough. So,
yeah, and look at just the episodes the episodes we've done of these Real Encounter series. When you see shootings, when somebody gets shot, you don't see them go toes up and done. They're always still physically capable immediately after the shots are fired, even if they end up dying later. Obviously, you can look at statistics and you can get specific examples of specific things, like where somebody does immediately get shut down. Obviously, that does happen too. But most people get shot aren't incapacitated immediately, and they're still dangerous even after they've been shot, even if their wounds are fatal and ultimately take their life. And that's an important perspective for people to have, because just because you start pulling the trigger doesn't necessarily mean the fight's over. And just because you're using a gun doesn't mean a gun is the only means of force that you might have to use to stop the threat. We always have to be prepared with that plan B. And even I think you and I did in the last Real Encounters video that you and I did together, where there's a physical struggle over a gun, that can happen where you're in a physical struggle in addition to being in the shooting. Those things can all happen in the same encounter. The other thing I'd like to point out here before my thoughts after this point would be going into what happened afterwards. But one more thought I have just about this particular part of the encounter was, a lot of times in the gun training industry, a lot of training is developed on the range for the range, and it's very inconsistent with what happens in the real world. And I think a real good example of this, where you get this disconnect, is we've all seen these exercises and these debates. Do you shoot the target one time each when you're dealing with multiple threats and then come back to finish off anybody who's left? Do you shoot them 2 times each and then come back and finish off anybody who's left? Do you shoot the guy with the knife who's closer or the gun that's further? The reality is, first of all, your eyes will fixate on the threats as you perceive them to be in the moment that the altercation is happening. In other words, whatever you perceive to be most urgent, that's where your eyes are going to go. But you're going to engage the threats based on the circumstances in that moment. There is no formula or doctrine that you can say that you're going to do a certain way. Here, he had 3 threats. 2 out of the 3 attacked him, but he didn't start putting shots in all 3 people. He put shots in the one person who was attacking him at that moment, and then they all ran out. So he wasn't engaging all 3 threats. He was engaging one threat, and he was engaging the threat that was attacking him. So we have to respond to these things based on the circumstances of the moment, not with these preconceived range mathematical formulas that are based off of, almost like a range game when we're trying to decide, what passive paper target gets shot first and in what order and how many times. It just doesn't happen that way in a fight. What are your thoughts about that?
Again, I'm going to agree with you 100%. Through the whole video, our victim shows a lot of self-control. We can back it up even further. Situational awareness, spatial awareness. Let's back up to that statement I made a minute ago. When these guys start getting really loud and obnoxious, what's he do? He leaves. He gets up and goes to the bathroom. He gives it a chance to go away. Now, maybe he really did have to go to the bathroom really bad. But let's be honest, we don't have him here. We don't know if he went to the bathroom at all. He might have just taken himself out of that situation, hoped that it calmed down, then he came back. When he does come back, it's not calmed down. Again, you got this guy shaking people's hands, well, one person's hand. He doesn't want his hand shook. He steps back. He takes a very passive stance. He shrugs his shoulder. We know, I don't want to shake your hand. He avoids the confrontation. What's he get as a payback for avoiding trouble? The guy comes to him, throws a sucker punch at him. Right? So through this whole thing, he showed a pretty courageous calm, in my opinion. And that would be my professional opinion. And like you say, depending on the school of thought he trained under, he might have been those guys. He might have shot them all, and that would have been a problem for him. So even in the end, when he goes to deadly force, he still shows a lot of great self-control in only engaging the immediate. A lesser person might have shot the guy that threw the punch at him and maybe put a couple of rounds into the other guy wearing a black T-shirt who's kind of threatening also. So through this whole thing, and I'm not, he's not necessarily the poster child for perfect, but he's darn close. He's up there on my hit parade of individuals who just show good sound judgment and calm in a very dangerous situation. And I'm glad that the local authorities decided that there was nothing to prosecute him for. My professional opinion is that was a good call. Once they saw the video and interviewed the independent witnesses, employees, the man and woman sitting in the booth right next to the counter, I'm sure they, being the professionals they were, said, no, this was a good shooting. And thank God he had a gun on him. Because the 3 of those guys could have very easily, right there in that Waffle House, crippled him for the rest of his life or killed him. And that's not right. He didn't do anything wrong. He was sitting there trying to get a waffle. And there's nothing wrong with that. Yeah,
absolutely. And I think from a defensive point of view, as far as the actual altercation itself goes, I think he did a great job. I have nothing but good things to say about him. We can always, any type of event could be critiqued to say something maybe could have done better. But as individuals, when we're in those situations, we know that it's never perfect. It's just the way that it is. You're reacting to things in the moment to the best of your understanding based on your interpretation of what's happening. And that's just what it is. And the only virtue in violence is victory. And that's what he did. He shut down the threat, didn't get hurt in the process. And there's nothing but good things to say about that. Now, with after the shooting encounter, I do have some critiques there. I don't like the fact that he put the gun down. I think he would have been just fine to holster the gun. I don't want to be critical of him because, again, I have so many good things to say about him, but just being honest, I wouldn't consider it really advisable to set the gun down like that because, number one, you've got the folks that left could come back, but also the other people in that Waffle House could have taken possession of the gun too. Now, I don't think either one of those 2 outcomes were probable. I think the most likely outcome is exactly what happened, but it doesn't matter. I don't think you should relinquish control of that gun, nor should you keep it in your hand. I think you should holster that gun, stay in a grip-ready position until you see the police arrive, and then take your hands off the gun and follow their instructions. You're communicating with 911 and letting them know all this. So that's one perspective I have. The other perspective I have is I would not have gotten down on the ground unless that's what I was told to do. Now, maybe 911 told him that. I don't know. If they told him then he should have followed instructions and he's fine. But I would not have voluntarily laid down on the ground because I just don't believe it's necessary. You know, I don't think when the cops came in that they would have required that to have happened. And if they did want that to happen, they would have given him the instructions then. Now, the last thing I'm going to mention here, and then I'm going to leave the floor to you, Joe, but I'm very curious to hear your opinion on this. I often tell people, and if I'm wrong, you know, say it. You know, no two people agree 100% of the time, and I want people to hear different perspectives if there's different perspectives, you know, between us to offer them. But I like it when people have the ability to leave the scene and go to a safe place, because you never know, are those people going to come back in again? And if there was a body on the ground, you don't want to be there with a gun in your hand when the cops arrive, because they don't know if you're a good guy or bad guy at that point, and they may be dealing with you as though the person on the ground is the innocent victim, and they have to immediately deal with you to protect that person on the ground. So if he could have gone into the parking lot, if he could have gone to the building next door, not flee the scene, but just not be in that exact place, I think that would have been better for everybody. Gun in a grip ready position until the cops arrive, hands off the gun and follow their instructions. That would have been my recommendation. What are your thoughts?
Well, I'm going to agree with some of that and disagree with some also. I agree with you that he had no business putting that gun on that counter. It looks to me, and again, the video is a little fuzzy, but I believe that he separates the magazine from the gun. I don't care. There's two people in the booth right next to that counter. There's employees behind the counter. You have no idea if those customers that just left are regulars and well-liked by everybody in there. The man and the woman sitting in the booth right next to where he puts the gun down could have been friends, relatives, fellow gang members. You have no idea who all those players are or how they're involved. So I agree with you 100%, don't surrender the gun. I would occasionally agree with you, but not in these circumstances, that it would be okay to leave the facility. The reality is he's already faced multiple adversaries, and let's be honest, I can guarantee you he doesn't know where they all went. So walking outside to another location or waiting in the parking lot, I would not agree with. Based on human factors, he is already situationally aware of who's in the Waffle House, who's coming and going. He's already aware, he had already picked a safe spot down that corridor. I might have, if I were him, waited near that corridor with my back to that corridor if I knew nobody else was down that hallway, so I knew nobody was going to come up behind me. And I would have directed, and again, he doesn't have this, he doesn't do this for a living like I have for 38 years. Me personally, I would have directed an employee, go outside, the police are on the way. When they get here, house uniform, put your hands up and tell them, you know, in my case, the off-duty officer's inside. In anyone watching that's not a cop, the legally armed citizen is inside. He's a black male with a white T-shirt and dark pants on. He will have his hands up when you come in the Waffle House, do whatever you tell him to do. He is scared for his life right now. But send somebody out to meet the police. But maybe in these circumstances, none of the people in there would want to go out. They might all say the same thing. Now, there could be more of those bad people out there. We're going to stay in here with you because you got the gun. So in this particular set of no problem with him staying there. I, like you, don't agree with him laying on the floor unless the dispatcher told him, get on the ground. If you look at the video, well, you have to, if this is going to make any sense, our discussion, you'll see that they handcuff both subjects, the man in the kind of striped shirt, horizontal striped shirt, who shook the bad guy's hand. They cuff him and take him out. They cuff our shooter and take him out. For everybody watching, don't be surprised if that happens. The police are going to get there. They don't know the totality of the circumstances. They're not sure exactly what happened. Don't be surprised if momentarily, for a short period of time, you're taken into custody until they figure out what's going on. They're definitely going to search you. Okay? So don't be surprised with that. As you know, Ian, I've told my students for years, it's not just the critical incident that will get you, it's the aftermath. And aftermath means from the first second after the threat's over and done, whether they ran out the door or they're laying incapacitated, dying, or dead on the floor, to a week, a month, a year later, you have to be prepared to deal with legal authorities. You need a good criminal defense attorney, not your Uncle Louie who does real estate law. You need a good experienced criminal defense attorney to keep on retainer, because they're gonna initially treat it like a crime. I say this having investigated police shootings. Even if it's a cop, we treat it like it was a crime till we can prove otherwise. So be ready for the aftermath, people. Whether you have to punch somebody in the nose or put 3 bullets in them, realize that from second one, after the threat has deteriorated and is gone, up until weeks, months, maybe years later, you could be dealing with the emotional aspect as well as the legal aspect of what happened.
Yeah, absolutely. And, we both have friends that are officers that have shot people. And one of our friends said to me, it was a real shock of reality, so to speak, when they sat down in that room and the officers that were overseeing the case of them shooting, even though they're 100% justified, said this is a criminal investigation and you're the target of that investigation. And the reality is that happens to private citizens. It happens to police too. And it doesn't mean you did anything wrong. It doesn't even mean anybody thinks you did anything wrong. You just got to know that's a process that we got to go through, because the system has an obligation to protect everybody's rights. And they don't know if the person you shot was trying to hurt you and you lawfully defended yourself, or if you unjustly assaulted another innocent person, and you've got to go through that process. And that means you got to be mentally prepared for that process, and don't take it one way or the other. Don't take it as an accusation of guilt. Just know that it's a process that you have to go through, and be mentally prepared for that as best you can, by at least knowing that it's going to happen and being aware of that. And so you bring up a very interesting point, and I was glad to hear you say that. So you're not necessarily saying that in concept, the principle of leaving the scene and relocating in a safe place is necessarily bad, but merely that it depends on the circumstances, because if the place you're in is safer than going somewhere else, in other words, the goal is you want to be in a place that's as safe as possible. That could conceivably mean staying where you are, or it could mean going somewhere else, both of which are potentially valid. Which one is more valid will depend on the individual circumstances you're in. Does that make sense? And did I say correctly?
Absolutely. That's a very agreeable and, in my opinion, correct statement. Always look at, when I do a use of force investigation as a consultant or an expert witness, depending on the circumstances. When I worked as a supervisor in my agency years past, what we always look at is the totality of the circumstances. In totality, was this a good situation? Well, for those of you that are in the mix, in the situation when it's happening, you have to look at the totality of the circumstances too. Again, not just to the point where you use force. Those 3 guys could have run out to their vehicle and come back with shotguns and AK-47s or machetes or whatever. So you have to look at the big picture and say, okay, the immediacy is over. Now what do I do? Is it better to stay here, shelter in place, and wait for the cavalry to arrive? Or should I get the heck out of Dodge? So why would you get the heck out of Dodge? Well, what if there was like 6 or 8 more short-haired white guys in black T-shirts with dark shorts on in that Waffle House? He might have been better off leaving there, because he might, as you know, years ago, I went to a major city in this country on business for a police conference. And unbeknownst to me, I got surrounded by gang members. I was in the armpit of this gang's household. I was right in front of a major housing development that this gang ran. And thank God I never said I was a cop. They surrounded my car. They surrounded a friend of mine. I talked him down and said, guys, I knew something was up. I said, guys, I'm lost. And I'm just trying to find the Holiday Inn. And they said, it's that way, dude. And I was like, you guys are gentlemen, and I appreciate your help. And we left. And we didn't have guns. We couldn't carry guns there. And my buddy had a knife in each hand. He was ready. And I had my hand on a knife in my pocket. And it was just by luck that I looked and said, look, they're all wearing the same colors. This is not a good thing. In this circumstance, had he been surrounded by individuals who were of the same character, he might have been better off leaving. But he made a decision. I think in this circumstance, it was a good decision. But your statement is correct. Look at the big picture. Is it safer for me to go, or is it safer for me to stay? There is no automatic here. Don't say, I got to get out of here, run next door and call 911. You might be better off staying right there. However, when you're in the armpit of a gang activity, you might be better off jumping into your car, peeling out of there, drive a mile or two while you're on the phone saying, there's like 8 guys all wearing the same kind of clothes. I think they were gang members, and I left, but I'll be at the Waffle House down the road or the Taco Bell, send the police there as well as to the scene. So you've got to look at the big picture. There's no doubt about that.
Yeah, great. Well, I'm very glad we had a chance to explore that point, and that's why I like it when we can come at things from a different perspective. And I, like if I'm teaching a home defense concept as an example, and the strong point defense concept, in my house, if everybody's upstairs and somebody tries to come upstairs, well, all I've got to protect is that staircase. Makes it a very small amount of geography that I have to own. If they come up that staircase and they get shot, now they're on that staircase. Well, I'm not going to try to leave the house at that point because they're on the staircase, the only means of leaving. So I'm just going to hold them at gunpoint. If I haven't already called 911, we're on the phone now and we're waiting for the police to arrive and we're dealing with it that way. But on the other hand, if somebody attacks in the house and you have the ability to defend yourself and then leave and go somewhere else so you're not in that area where there could be additional problems, then that might be the better solution too. And without going into a lot of examples, I had one student before he was a student protect his sister from an ex-boyfriend and 3 of his friends. Big, strong, tough guy, successfully fought him off. And then, of course, what's coming now, they came back and they shot him up because he was still there. And of course, that happens a lot too. So I think you explained it very well, and I'm very glad that we had a chance to go into that deeper. Those are all my thoughts about that video. I thought it was a great clip with a lot of great opportunities to discuss important issues. Wonderful job on his part. If I ever meet this guy's hand, he's got my respect. I'll be honored to shake his hand. I thought he did a great job. After the fact, I thought there was definitely some room for improvement. I don't fault him for any of it, but for those people watching, things to consider if you're ever in that situation. And Joe, I thought your input was really good. Obviously, I'm so glad to have you share your experiences with folks. Do you have anything that you want to sum up?
No, overall, good job. There's an old saying that no plan survives first contact with the enemy. So I think his actions were very dynamic and fluid. Overall, he did an excellent job. There's a couple of small things there. If that was his gun he dropped, get a good holster, please, a retention holster of some sort. Because as I say, and this proves it, you are more likely to be involved in a violent hands-on encounter than you are a shooting. And that did happen first in this encounter. It is more likely, and if that was his gun he dropped, please, young man, whoever you are, get a good security holster. Something that's going to retain the weapon without giving you difficulty in drawing it. And then secondly, don't disarm yourself. Until the cavalry arrives and things are safe, just don't do that.
Yeah.
Other than that, he did a great job. I'd like to shake his hand too.
Absolutely. And Joel, if people have an interest in some resources that we've created as a free public service that go along with some of the things we talked about today, you and I did a podcast number 2 at livesafeacademy.com or on iTunes, on Stitcher, Human Factors, where we talk about survival stress and how it affects human performance, is a great complement to what people are seeing in this video and some of the things that we've talked about. You and I also did a podcast, again, the Live Safe Academy podcast, which you can get on our website, iTunes, Stitcher, and starting at podcast number 5, SoundCloud. And that's common mistakes of gun owners. And those are all things that people may have an interest in based on some of the things we've talked about today. And Joe, can you tell people how they can get a hold of you if they want to get a hold of you? And I'll have links in the show notes so they can go directly out to the webpage on Facebook. But if folks want to bring you in to train, or if they want to ask you questions, what's the best way to get a hold of you?
The Facebook page is great, but also if they want to contact me directly, they can contact me at joe@defensivetactics.com. So either go to the Facebook page, which is defensivetactics.com, or joe@defensivetactics.com.
Great, excellent. And it's defensive.tactics.com on Facebook, or the email address. Of course, they can always get a hold of me if they want to get a hold of you. And, we've got a lot of great free resources on our website. We also provide a lot of training. And, Joe, I know you and I do a lot of training together, so they always have that option as well. So thank you so much for being on this episode of Real Encounters. And for all the people that are out there watching, thank you so much for spending your time with us. I hope you felt it was valuable. If you have any questions or comments, you're always welcome to contact me as well. Ian Kinder, livesafeacademy.com. Be safe. Have a wonderful day.
Would you like to connect with Live Safe Academy, LLC? Would you like to help us spread the word so we can help more people? Go to livesafeacademy.com/connect to join our email list, subscribe to our podcast on iTunes, subscribe to our YouTube channel, like us on Facebook. Get free safety information and learn more about our classes and premium online learning opportunities. Because you have the right to be safe, no one has the right to hurt you, and you are worth protecting.